Hi, I'm Jennifer Fulton, and welcome to another episode of Intelligent Quilting. Today we're going to talk about making flying geese using the stitch and flip method. It's also known as connecting corners or flipped corners. This is the method that's great for scrappiness because you can make each of the sky squares a different color. So for example, back here on this, when you're making a sawtooth star block, you can have this point be one color and this point be another. I showed you a design in the other video where I talked about all the different methods and the pluses and minuses, where that would be an advantage to be able to do that. So you're here to learn about stitch and flip. Real quick, the pluses and minuses, I've already talked about a couple. Just as a reminder, with this one, you're going to be drawing lines. So that's a minus, but I will show you some tricks to get around that. And also, you may or may not have, depending on how you sew, you may or may not press well enough to get this to flip back into the corner. That may or may not be a problem. I will show you a trick for solving that as well. So let's get started. The first thing that you need to do is figure out what size to cut your rectangle. You will need one rectangle and two squares to make a flying geese unit using the stitch and flip method. The math is really easy as it turns out. The rectangle that you need is basically the size of your finished unit plus a ½ inch. So in my case, I want to make a flying geese unit that's 2 inches tall and 4 inches wide. By the way, flying geese are normally a 2-to-1 ratio like this. So this is great. The math works out really good. So 2 inches tall and 4 inches wide. So my rectangle will be 2.5 by 4.5 inches. So you just add a ½ inch. For the sky squares, you cut them at 2.5 inches. So you cut them the height of your rectangle that you're cutting. So again, you're going to need two of those, 2 sky squares and 1 goose rectangle. Then you need to mark. So let me show you how to do that. First of all, I'm using a sandboard here, which helps grip my fabric so it won't shift around as I'm trying to mark. Then I'm going to take a nice short ruler, line it up. I want to make a mark from point to point. And since this is a light square, I'm going to just use my mechanical pencil. Let me make sure I've got that right. And I just draw it along there a couple times so I can see. Again, when we get to the sewing machine, I'll show you how to bypass the whole marking part. Let me show you another trick. The other problem with the stitch and flip method is that you end up with a lot of bulk. You're flipping this corner back, so you have this extra fabric here. The background can be cut away. This part of the flipped corner can be cut away. That does waste a lot of fabric, but let me show you a trick on how you can utilize or repurpose that extra fabric. If you take something called the folded corner clipper, the folded corner clipper, you can take it to pre-trim your rectangle and your square prior to sewing. So what you do is you place this ruler on the size of your sky square, in this case 2.5 inches. Notice that it's giving me the diagonal from point to point and also this extra margin, which is my 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to cut that off. That reduces the bulk when I fold this back over because this fabric isn't going to be there. Plus, I can take these squares, I can save them, sew 1/4 inch away from this seam line, press it open, and create half square triangles, but bonus half square triangles. So again, it's the folded corner clipper, and I'll have a link to that tool and to the other tools that I've just used in the description of this video so that you can shop online and find them if you want to. Now that we've prepped our square, by the way, I'm gonna take this one where I've drawn the line, and I'm gonna go ahead and put it on the corner of my unit, and I'll pin. And we'll go to the sewing machine. Just need one pin, really. We'll go to the sewing machine and sew on that line. And then I will go ahead and sew this triangle that we've prepped on the other side. So I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. So we've drawn our line, and now we're ready to sew. You could go ahead and sew exactly on that line. But one trick that will help you in the pressing back and will it meet the corner business is sewing just inside this line. In other words, you're going to be sewing closer to this corner. And what that does is that gives you a couple of threads of fabric width that will be enough to cover the amount that the fold takes up. So let's try that. I'm just going to put my needle just to the slightest bit. And what I'm using actually is the edge of my foot here as my guide to stitch just inside that line. Not enough where it will make any bit of difference in terms of the final look, but it will make a difference when I'm pressing. This, by the way, is an ender. The other bit of scrap fabric is called a leader. I like to use those when I'm sewing because it gives my sewing machine a chance to adjust its thread tension before I get to my actual fabric. So I have sewn on this line and now we're ready to go, but let me show you what you would do if you had used the corner clipper to clip off your triangle. All you have to do, well, first you would want to press. Let's pretend we've pressed that really, really well. And then you attach your second corner. And your triangles will match at the end there. See how there's kind of almost a notch? So you just line those up, and that's how you're going to get them perfectly situated for adding to this. So again, at this point, I am going to sew an exact 1/4 inch. So my foot, this is a 1/4 inch foot, is going to be, the edge of it is right on the edge of that fabric there. So onto my ender there. And use my Tula Pink scissors. Aren't they pretty? I love this thing. I am a bling girl. I will say that. So now I'm ready to press the other side and see how that's going to get you a nice perfect 1/4 inch above that point so it doesn't get cut off. And in the case of the corner clipper method, I'm not going to have that extra fabric there. So let me show you what happens, or let me show you a method now that you can use if you haven't marked your fabric. So here we are, and I'm using diagonal seam tape. In the video where I talked about the tools that I like to use for Flying Geese, I mentioned this, and I'll have a link to it in this video description so that you can purchase it if you want to. But using the diagonal seam tape, notice that there's a striking red line that you line up with the needle. And then on either side of that red line are black lines that are clearly marked 1/4 inch. So those are going to help me sew without having to mark. Let me show you how it works. So I've got my fabric square and I've pinned it. And I need to sew from corner to corner. So I'm going to line up the first corner underneath the needle. And then I accidentally drew a line on here, but pretend there isn't a line. What I'm going to do down here is I'm lining up this other corner along the red line. Remember, the red line is right in front of your needle, and you're trying to sew from point to point. So by keeping this lined up, I am sewing point to point. but I'm not having to mark. So personally, my recommendation is to invest in diagonal seam tape. It is removable, so you can remove it whenever you want. And the roll has plenty of tape on it, so frankly, it more than you'll ever need, but you know, at least for a good long time. But I keep it on here most of the time and use it. This is a perfect reason for using it when you're having to sew from corner to corner and you don't feel like marking. So there you go. Let me sew onto an ender here. And then let me use my beautiful tulip pink scissors to cut. There you go. And I'll trim the leader off the front there. And it's perfect, and I didn't have to mark a thing. And now I'm ready to press. Let me show you one other way of doing it. Again, I'll just pretend to press this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin it back out of the way. So I'm going to pretend to press so I can add the other corner. And I'm going to show you my other method that I use. And this is actually the one I use all the time instead of the diagonal seam tape, because I discovered this and I think it's really cool. And voila, I have my laser installed. I showed this laser on the intro to Flying Geese video, but I thought I'd show you again how it's set up. Let me lift the camera here. There. It's attached to the top of my sewing machine with some Velcro, and there is a switch on the side so I can turn it on and off as needed. I have you can position the straight line of the laser wherever you want, and I've put it, I don't know if you can see, just to the left of my needle. The needle is inside the line, and what that's going to do is allow me to sew inside the line, which, as you remember, is a trick for getting the corner to meet when you flip it over, when you press it over. So now that I have my line, I simply line the first corner up with the needle, and then I am going to line the bottom point of my square with the laser. And that will be my guide, and I don't need to draw a thing. It is a beautiful method, and I really love it because I don't have to draw, and I don't have to mark on my machine or do anything. Just get a little piece here to sew off on. And then I will use my beautiful scissors to snip. Look at that. There. And then clip that off. And we're ready to go to press. And by the way, the sequence really is you sew the one corner on and thoroughly press before you add and sew the second corner on. So just didn't want you to get confused because I needed to show you some things on the video. So let's go to the pressing station. Here we are at the pressing station. And again, I would have already pressed this one corner before sewing the other corner. But let me show you. What I do is I finger press, and then you're just going to lay your hot iron on it. I am pressing on a wool pressing mat because I like them. They help me press flatter. The wool captures the heat and radiates it back up on the fabric so that you get a nice crisp fold. I love that. My iron is on hot cotton setting with no steam. I don't put any water in my iron. If I want to use water for something, I have a spray bottle that I use, so I do it like that. I find that helps me control where the water goes, when I'm using it, when I'm not. Also, it helps my iron last longer. So let's press this second corner. This doesn't have the waste fabric on it because I use the folded corner clipper to cut that off. So I'm just going to, again, finger press, and then I lay you can use the tip of your iron if you want, lay my iron straight down on it to press it flat. Then I press from the back. And when you're not doing the clipper method where you've removed this excess, you should probably remove this bulk here. But only after checking to make sure that your corner covers that rectangle. If it doesn't, then I would leave it. But anyway, we can go ahead and clip that away. There you go. You can save these bonus triangles if you wanted to try to, but they'd have to be perfectly cut, and those are just kind of eyeball. So I will press this again. And then I will go ahead and measure this, trim this up as needed, so we'll do that back at the cutting station, but let me press this other one. Oh, by the way, I saved the triangles from the corner clipper, and I will go ahead and press those. I like to press my seams open, so I'm going to do that. This is an itty bitty triangle. Not really sure if I'm going to use that, but I will then trim that down to a usable size. And for the other one, you I would have already pressed this prior to sewing on the other corner. So I press that first, and then sew this one on. This is the set that I sewed without drawing the lines. I used the diagonal seam tape on the one side, and I used my laser on the other side. So two methods you can use, and they will save you, well, a lot of time because you won't have to draw lines. So there you go. And with this method, I do have that extra bulk, so I can go ahead and trim that away. Typically, I measure my flying geese and trim them to size before I decide to cut the excess fabric off, in case I have to like resew or something like that. But I will go ahead and trim that off now. And if you want to use these triangles as bonus half square triangles, what I would do is I would use a rotary cutter, and I would measure exactly 1/4 of an inch there. So you would get a nice perfect triangle there that you could then sew together and create a bonus half square triangle. In this case, I'm not much into sewing itty bitty little half square triangles, so this is scrap to me. But there you go. Let me press this flat one more time. After trimming, sometimes it kind of comes up a bit. And there you go. Two different half square triangles made with lots of different methods. Hopefully you'll find one that you like. Let's go downstairs and to the cutting table, and I will show you how I measure to make sure these are the right size. Hi, we're back at the cutting table, so now it's time to trim up our flying geese. They should be already the right size, but I always check, because if your block units are trimmed or checked to be the right size, then when you put together a block, it will be the right size as well. It will go together better, it will be flat. So take the time to check each part of the block units, before you assemble a block. So check your half square triangles, check your flying geese, check whatever, 4 patches, whatever else you're making, square and square, for your block before you put it together. And you'll find that it will be a lot flatter, and it will make putting together the whole quilt top a lot easier as well. So we're at the cutting station, and this, as you may recall, is a 2.5 by 4.5 inch unfinished flying geese. So I'm going to I want to make sure that I'm trimming each side equally. So I'm going to put the 2.25 inch mark. That's 4.5 divided by 2 is 2.25. So I'm going to take this 2.25 inch mark and put it right on that point. That way I'm trimming exactly enough on this side and on this side. if I am trimming at all. And then I'm going to use my 2.5 inch line here to line along the bottom of the Flying Geese. So it looks like I do need to trim just a tiny bit. With the folded corner method, the stitch and flip method, you will be trimming just a tiny bit. And then I'm going to trim, and I've got my rotating cutting mat that helps me get into proper position for trimming, so I don't have to trim across myself. I've trimmed 2 sides. I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to trim the other 2 sides. I'm once again going to line up the 2.25 inch mark on that point. That's very important. Use the 2.5 inch mark right here along the bottom. 4.5 inch mark is on this side I just trimmed. So if I have anything left to trim, it'll be on this side and maybe possibly along the bottom. Doesn't look like there's anything really to trim there, but I'll run the rotary cutter there just in case. Now I've trimmed just a little. Oh, it looks like there was a little bit. And this is now perfect. Because this was the folded corner method, I do have this excess bulk, and I told you before at the ironing station that I like to trim this after I get this perfect, because if I need to resew anything, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. Now what I like to do is I like to, you can go ahead and trim off exactly 1/4 inch on these. So you lay your ruler right on that seam. There we go. And then trim. And then these triangles are now perfect half square triangles, and I can sew them together and get bonus half square triangles if I feel like doing that. You don't have to remove the bulk, but I really, really recommend it because it just makes it harder to quilt through, whether you're quilting by machine or whether you're quilting by hand. Especially if you're quilting by hand, you'll want to remove that extra fabric. But even if you're quilting by machine, and it will easily go through all 3 layers, you'll want to go ahead and remove that after you've trimmed up your Flying Geese to make sure they're the right size. So that's it. That's the method called stitch and flip. And again, it makes 1 Flying Geese unit at a time. Very good for scrappy, and it's a nice, easy method to do because you're not dealing with any bias or anything. If you like this video, please click the thumbs up button and like it. That really helps other people find this video. Also, if you like me and you like my tutorials, please follow. That helps other people find my videos, and plus I appreciate that you like me. So click the follow button if you want to. Remember that in the video description I will have not only a link to all the tools that I've used today, but also a link to a free download that will help you with the math. The math here for the stitch and flip method is pretty easy, but it will also include the math for all the other Flying Geese methods that I've talked about. So that will help you. So feel free to click that link and download that free guide today. Thank you. Bye.